Koreans migrated to Manchuria and Siberia since the end of 19th century because of starvation caused by corrupt government and excessive taxation. During Japanese occupation, there was a surge of Korean migration to Manchuria because Japanese needed rice to feed their troops in Manchuria, and the Koreans were very good to grow rice. During Bolshevik Revolution, there were over 300,000 Koreans in Siberia and over 400,000 in Manchuria near the border. For Koreans who lost their country and their activities were limited inside of Korea, it became fertile ground for their independent movement. There were provisional governments, one in Siberia and one in Manchuria before March 1st movement in 1919. One should remember that these two regions were part of two largest communist countries and very close to North Korea. The provisional government in Shanghai that was established in 1919 was a kind of combination of the governments in Siberia, Manchuria, and Seoul, Korea. Naturally, there were some activists who belonged to the right and the left. The president of the provisional government in Shanghai was Syngman Rhee, who became the first president of South Korea later. And the prime minister was Lee Dong-hui, who created Korean Socialist Party. Syngman Rhee, who was in exile in the United States of America, he raised money from the public, mainly from the Korean immigrants. But he did not send majority of the money that he raised, and he did not show up to work to the government in Shanghai. It was very difficult to raise money in Korea because of Japanese surveillance and crackdown. So the finances of the provisional government largely depended on the money from Lenin of Soviet Union. It would be very curious for South Koreans who grew up under the influence of United States to see how Koreans at the time made connection to Lenin of Soviet Union. Alexandra Kim was born in 1885 in Vladivostok area in Maritime province in Russia. She lost her mother when she was very little, and she moved to Manchuria where her father was working as a translator in railroad construction site. So she could speak Chinese, Russian, and Korean. But her father died at the age of 10, and she had to move back to Vladivostok. There she grew up under the care of Joseph Stankiewicz, who was her father's friend. And she became a teacher, and she married to Stankiewicz's son. But soon she divorced, and she went to the west and rural region where many Korean laborers are working on the lumber yard. She was hired as a translator, but she tried to solve the unjust treatment of laborers for Russians as well as Koreans. She found out that many laborers did not get paid because governments were changing during Russian Revolution. And she initiated the negotiation with the government and she was able to get them paid by the government. And Lenin recognized her effort, and she became a member of Bolsheviks and rose to be the secretary. And she was appointed as the chairperson of external affairs at the Far Eastern Department of the party. Japanese entered into World War I, and they were on the side of Russians, and that was the reason why that Korean laborers were in Lumbayard, where Alexandra Kim was working as a translator. But in 1917, after Bolshevik Revolution, Russians withdrew from World War I, and Russia plunged into the Civil War. And Japan was on the side of White Army, fighting against the Red Army, which is the Bolsheviks army. Consequently, the Korean independent fighters were fighting against Japanese alongside Red Army. And Lee Dong-hui was commanding one of the units of the Korean fighters. And one day he was arrested by the White Army. And Alexandra Kim somehow rescued him. And both got to know each other. And Alexandra Kim helped him to create the Korean Socialist Party. In a later month of 1918, Alexandra Kim was captured by White Army and executed. Before her death, she arranged Lee Dong-hui and members of Korean Socialist Party to attend Komintern conference in July of 1920. There they met Lenin, and Lenin promised a large sum of money to aid a provisional government in Shanghai. Lee Dong-hui at the time was the prime minister of the government. Lenin promised Lee Dong-hui and others 2 million rubles to aid provisional government, but it was difficult to carry all the money at once. So they decided to bring 400,000 rubles first, and they sent Kim Nip to Lenin to bring the money back to the government. But he didn't come back with the money to the government. Instead, he went to the Korean Socialist Party with the money. When it was found out by the government officials, Lee Dong-hui was accused of embezzling the money. He had to resign from the post of prime minister, and Kim Nip was assassinated by the leader of right-wing, Kim Gu. The government was thrown into turmoil, and it was divided into many factions. Even in the Socialist Party, there were about 20 factions. Lenin did not know which faction he should give money to. At the time, the Kuomintang, which was the right wing, did not trust the Korean Provisional Government because they thought the Korean people were siding with Japanese. Basically, all the sources of money were dried up, and the government was about to be dissolved. Then the right-wing leader Kim Gu came up with the great idea.